I realized when we started off today that I did not actually introduce myself, so apologies. Now that there are several hours into, let me welcome you to the Family Church at Heritage Green. My name is Alex Douglas. I'm the children and family pastor here, and one of the co-replanters of this congregation. At the back there is the Batman to my Robin, David, who's the lead family pastor here. And we are just, again, so thrilled to have you here with us, and grateful for Michelle accepting our invitation to come, and a little bit about our story. So we are a replant. This church in its present family-oriented model is about 2 years old. And we represent the jet ski that turned around rather than the cruise ship. We realize that change is a difficult thing to navigate, and sometimes change can feel an awful lot like turning around a cruise ship. We were at an opportunity where we could make a lot of change all at once, and that's why we're where we are after 2 years. What we want to talk a bit about now and will in the afternoon is sharing a bit of the transformation that God has brought about. Some of the transformation that happened in our hearts and the way in which we think about worship, the way in which we think about traditional ministry, the way in which we think about community connection, all of those kind of things, and share from our story to present a possibility, to present some options that maybe work, maybe won't work. But because at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, in light of the kind of teaching that we've been presented with and will continue to get in the afternoon, how do we respond to that? That's our life as Christians, as Christ followers, is about responding to God. It's not just about taking and going, well, that was nice. It's about actually responding. What does that look like in action? And so today, right now for my portion, I want to spend some time thinking about how prepared are we to take on the work that is before us? How prepared are we to actually take that work on? I want to suggest to you that often we find ourselves like a store with empty shelves. Suppose you walk into a hardware store and you're looking for duct tape, and you go to the tape section and the shelves are empty. And then you go, okay, well surely, well I also need a screwdriver, so you head over to the screwdriver section and the shelves are empty. And you go, okay, well, a saw. I do need a saw. Surely we'll have a saw. And you go over those sections, and again, it's empty, empty, empty. You finally find a staff person, and you say, so I'm here to get tools. I wanted to get some duct tape and some screwdrivers and a hammer. And they say, right, we thought you might, but we didn't know exactly what kind of duct tape you wanted, so we haven't ordered it yet. We wanted to find out what you needed. Or, well, screwdrivers, totally. We know people want screwdrivers, but we didn't know which, did you want Robertson, or do you want one with a fancy handle? So we're waiting until you tell us what you need, and then we'll have it ready for you. Sometimes that's the kind of churches that we are. We know what people are looking for in a general sense, but we don't have anything prepared when they arrive. We wait for them to come and tell us what they need, to tell us what they want, and then we'll have it ready for them on their next visit. But the trouble is, if you walked into that kind of a store, you would not go back there. You wouldn't. Because you'd go, I needed a screwdriver and there wasn't one. I needed duct tape and there wasn't one. So I went where there were those things. And so today we want to spend some time thinking about how prepared are we for the work that is before us? How do we respond to this? Michelle's example about wineskins is a really awesome one. And an idea that's kind of come to our mind that's sort of like the 2.0 of that idea is an Old Testament piece from Jeremiah 18 where God is talking about, and Jeremiah is talking about the potter and the clay. And it goes a little bit like this. A message from the Lord came to me. He said, Jeremiah, go down to the potter's house. I will give you my message there. So I went down to the potter's house. I saw him working at his wheel. His hands were shaping a pot out of clay. But he saw that something was wrong with it. So he formed it into another pot. He shaped it in the way that seemed best to him. Then the Lord's message came to me. people of Israel, I can do with you just as the potter does, announces the Lord. The clay is in the potter's hand, and you are in my hand, people of Israel. God goes on to expand through Jeremiah about what he can do when people are responsive to him, and what God can do when people are not responsive to him. It's a bit epic. We need to know that we are in God's hands, able to be shaped if we let God shape us. And so today I want to suggest that our ministries are made up of a spectrum of things that are malleable and that we are ready to change and willing to change, and things that are so hard-baked that it will take something epic for us to change them. So we're going to walk through a list of things. The list is on the boards that we handed out. If we miss a church, the goal is that each church would have one to work through. So if you need more, stick a hand up and David will grab you one. But we're going to work through this list of things. And we want you to take the stickers that are there, and we want to encourage you to rate what you need or where it falls on the spectrum at your church. There's going to be a pause after each segment for you to discuss as a team, is this a malleable thing in our church, or is this downright hard-baked that we are not moving at all? You've got the dots at your table there. Maybe stick with one color for your church if that works, just to keep it clear. And then later on today, we're going to be revisiting this. We want this to be something that you can take with you and work through, maybe not just with the people that are at the table today, but with some other leaders as well, as a way of engaging this conversation.
The dots.
So malleable or hard-baked. To begin, I just want to say that this is not a conversation of traditional versus contemporary. Just because something is malleable does not mean that you are a contemporary church, and just because something is hard-baked does not mean that you are a traditional church exclusively. We have all experienced, I think, that mix across the spectrum, that you will go to contemporary churches that, come hell or high water, will never change some things. And the same way that we can encounter that in traditional churches. And so I want to encourage you to come into this exercise with a blank slate, regardless of your worship orientation, regardless of the age of your church, leadership, focuses, whatever, and consider how malleable or hard-baked these items may be in your church, and how these might look. The perspective that I'm sharing from, again, is a bit different as the examples that I'm giving, because this church was designed with these principles in mind. We had a bit of a head start. As God had revealed to us what the kind of replant was going to look here, we weren't starting from a completely made model. There were some things that needed changing, and there were some things that just weren't here. And so we were able to introduce things in a starting orientation that was much more in line with some of the things that Michelle's talked about. And there were some things that we said coming in, FYI, we're not going to be working towards this. This is just the way it's going to be. And so we're coming from a bit of a different perspective, and so please don't hear us as a completely arrived church. This afternoon, Michelle's going to talk about different models of family ministry churches, and you'll probably be able to place us pretty accurately on that, for better or worse. So here we go. Let's start off with the number one thing there, music selections. The type of music selections that you have at your church make a big difference in terms of how easily people can enter into the kind of church experience that we're hoping for. And it says something about who we are as a worshiping community, and it says a lot about how accessible we are. We realized very quickly that because the starting congregation at this church when we came in was about 12 people, that this was a church that God was designing to grow. And so it was not a church about who was here, it would needed to be a church about who was coming. And so for us to look at our list and go, are we malleable in this way, or are we hard-baked? Is God ready to shape this or not? We needed to find out what people out there were looking for. Because the culture here was just about empty. They were open to anything that would see them grow. So the question before you is, how set in your ways are you with regards to your music selection in terms of connecting with families? When we came in, we spent a lot of time, probably the better part of 3 or 4 months, trying a good spectrum of music, trying to figure out what is the music that's connecting with families. We tried hymn stuff, traditional stuff, we tried camp style music, we tried straight up contemporary praise stuff, and it wasn't until we stumbled on something that we kind of call the folky Celtic stuff, that's a lot of it out there, did we realize we hit on what was with families today. And the interesting realization for us was, young families were just young couples a little while ago. And in the Hamilton area, there's a lot of pubs. And in those pubs, the kind of music that's being played is folky Celtic music. And so when we were creating a worship style that connected with where families were at, it was the kind of music that some couples fell in love with, the kind of music that they were listening to when they went out with friends. You know, the Mumford & Sons kind of stuff. And so arriving at things like Red Collective, bands like I Am They, or Tim Neufeld and the Glory Boys, who are a Canadian reference, if you're looking for something fun. New album out called Hoot Nanny, which is pretty awesome and sounds incredibly redneck. But anyway, so some of the music that we played this morning, that's the kind of music that we worship with our families. Again, because it's the kind of music that they can find on YouTube. It's the kind of albums that they can find on iTunes easily. And it's the kind of music that their kids start responding to. I have 2 kids right now. One of them is 5. People are laughing because we just found out on Thursday that we have 2 more coming in May. So that's, yay! 3's it, we're done 3 or 4. So, you know, whatever.
Family ministry.
That's it is, so I know. My daughter's kindergarten teacher was laughing. She's like, you guys have really hit on something with this church growth thing, right? You have no idea. But my 5-year-old was an awesome measure for us of how engaged she was with the music. And I remember the day when we were driving home from church and I first heard her humming back a song. And I said to Catherine, I said, we need to remember that. And then I checked in with some of our other families and they were kind of going, yeah, that one's got some play. We're going, okay, we're on to something. So it was a listening, it was a trial and error. It was a bit of a messy couple of months because it was not consistent in style. But it was an important part of our process of finding out what connects with the families in our church, because it could not be about what we knew. We tried things that we knew had worked in other places and they didn't work here. So it was about figuring out that process. Where does music selections fall on your scale? Is it a malleable thing that you would be willing to play with, willing to explore, or would you consider it something that is hard-baked at your church? Take a minute and figure out where that falls for you right now.
I think it's in the
They did 10,000 reasons. Should have moved back a little
This is interesting. This should be at the top of the list. But people have a lot of deep feelings about that. For sure.
Saturday after dinner.
But I know, I mean, I would hope that
Okay, these don't need to be definitive concrete things. So give it your best stab, and again, these are to be revisited. Maybe a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a month from now, with more people at the table. Just get down that initial impression, and we'll move on to the next one. So the next piece I want to put before you is the type of instruments that you use to communicate that music. What instruments do you use to communicate that music? Now for us, we had to discover things like, were we going to use a stand-up piano, or were we going to use a keyboard? For us, that was leaning into a digital model where we could broadcast our service on YouTube and that sort of stuff. It was very important that it was a digital instrument that could be changed. You may notice that our drum kit, if you come up here, is in a bit of a pit. That's because there used to be an organ there. The balcony in the back that Michelle always wants to preach from is actually an empty balcony that was meant for pipes in a pipe organ, which was never installed. And now you're going, I never noticed the balcony. How do I get up there? The answer is we don't know, and we'd love to see you try. So, but the type of instruments that you use have a big impact on the kind of music that you use. The music that we used this morning to sing to was actually our band playing. We had a number that couldn't be here today, so we recorded the tracks, and we'd be happy to share those with you if you would like those. Yes?
Can you clarify, does hard-baked mean that...
No chance it would move.
But unhappy with that?
Doesn't have to be unhappy.
But
Yeah, if it's hard-baked and cool with it, bless you. You don't have to worry about that. But I'm talking if the demographic of your neighborhood changed, and all of a sudden you were in a hip-hop community, and the type of music that the families in your area needed was that, how willing would your church be to go, let's give hip-hop a try?
Not likely.
Yeah. So instruments. How attached are you to the instruments in your church? Could it move, or is that sucker hard-baked into the floor in a pit?
What about a drum kit? Blues gospel. How malleable are you?
I'd say I think so too. Yeah, no, we're on that.
Okay. Next on the list, as you'll note there, is seating expectations. Now again, when we came into this space, there were no pews here. We found the blueprints for the building that they had intended to put pews in, but they never did. So we have had a blank slate, which many of you may not have the option of playing with. But again, the question is, how willing would people be to removing pews? Or putting in pews, if that was needed? How willing would you be to change the seating arrangements or expectations in your church?
Just a few.
So we're going to put seating expectations.
But I think it's...
So seating expectations is...
Another piece to consider in that mix is who sits where, and how willing would they be to move if somebody came. Yeah, that's all part of the seating expectations. So both physical space, but if somebody came in, because let me tell you, even if your church is only 6 rows deep, people will want to sit in the back row. And the back row is the most comfortable spot for a new family to sit, because they don't feel on display. They can see everybody, but nobody can see them. Is the back pew empty at your church? If somebody showed up, would they be allowed to sit there? If somebody was sitting there when the regular family showed up, would they ask them to move? Or would they find a new spot themselves? Seating expectations.
So should we put it here, should we put it here? Are we here? I think we're here. We said that shoes up, we're good.
Maybe that would be
Brand new.
Okay, the next one, being the overall decor in your church. Now, there's a good chunk of Presbyterians here today, and I think we can attest that often in our churches things have plaques on them. I've literally been to churches where there is a plaque above the door handle on a washroom. I'm not even kidding, right?
Somebody
But
donated.
how malleable is the decor of your church? When we came in here, there were a number of banners that were about 30 years old that were wonderful symbols of what had been at the church, but were also quite faded. Were a bit tattered. And the impression that it gives when you come in was not the joy of the Lord is present. Come alive, family of God. Rise, praise. Not those things. It was, that's old. Right? It was, that doesn't reflect vibrance. It doesn't reflect excitement. It represented something that was out of date. And so we have saved those things. But it was an important thing for us to take those things down to say, that's a reflection of what was, and we want to continue those attitudes and that kind of expectation, but not lean on those things. How malleable is the decor in your church? Maybe even think about seasonally. If someone were to suggest, maybe we don't cover the entire dais with Easter lilies this Easter, how well would that be received? If you said, maybe this year we don't fill every nook and cranny with poinsettias at Christmas, how well would that be received? How malleable or hard-baked is the decor at your church?
I want to remember that. Because yours, it's just good to get all the.
You know, like Ozark and somebody had done them. And I'm going to take it all. A gallon of fresh paint and roll it all over. And somebody would have fries.
Now, did you notice any things which are there on all seasons?
Those eyes?
They're part of the furniture. Do you notice anything in the sanctuary?
Now, one thing is that there's a case.
Okay, I'm going to lump the next two together because they have a lot to do with how accessible and how welcome people feel, and that's food and drink and attire. What kind of atmosphere is being created by the type of food and drink that you serve, or the attire that the general percentages fill in your church? Well, sure. So that's an excellent example. So some places, it is extremely frowned upon if you bring a travel mug into worship. Other places, it's extremely frowned upon if you replace the styrofoam cups at coffee hour, because we always use styrofoam cups, or we always use cups and saucers. Are those the kind of expectations that are there? We have found, and something that we're continuing to wrestle through is, of course, the peanut-free issue. This church, when it was 12 people, didn't have to worry about allergies because there weren't any. We have discovered that, from personal experience, peanut allergies require a great deal of adjusting in how your church handles hospitality, but also incredibly so, how likely somebody is to return. If they come into your church visiting for the first time, and you have to make an announcement about, just to let you know, the refreshments that are being served are not entirely nut-free, sometimes they never come back. Because for them it's a safety issue. It's not entirely about what they like or don't like. For them, it's life or death in some cases. So that's sort of a tackle. An additional piece to that is young families aren't totally thrilled when their pastor hands out lollipops on a weekly basis. But what they do like are things like fruit. Fruit at reception time is probably a different thing. A lot of us think, oh, coffee hour, that's when we get baked goods. Awesome. Right. It's also right before lunchtime. And families like to know that their kids are getting good things. Young families today are particularly aware of these sorts of things, so the kind of hospitality that you have will send messages to some families about whether or not they come back, or at least to know that you're considering these things. Attire is sort of a similar thing. How comfortable does somebody feel when they come into your church? We say come as you are, but come as you are, but just so you know everyone's going to be wearing suits and dresses, is not really saying come as you are. It's that you can come as you are. You'll feel entirely out of place, but feel free to come as you are. My parents, when I graduated from seminary, were set on buying me a robe and a stole. They gave me catalogs. They were like, we did our research and we think this place is great. And I had to say to them, you know, Mom and Dad, I don't see myself ever needing that in my ministry. And that was a hard thing for them to come to grips with because that was church for them. When I found out I was going to seminary, that I'm sure they were like, yes. And my dad mentioned, he said, I found your great-grandfather's stole, and I really wanted to pass that on to you. And I said, hey, Dad, you can pass that on. I'm not going to wear it. But, and not in a mean way, but the type of presentation, David is the slacks guy, I'm the jeans guy. That was very intentional for us, so that even from the pastoral leadership at the front, people can see a representation that's not the same. It's a different level of accessibility, because we want people to know that they can come and wear a tie if they want. Because some people, my dad, when he comes and visits, he wears a suit. He's the only guy who doesn't. But it suits him just fine. That's terrible. But that's him. That's his comfort level. And my younger brother, he said, if I come wearing a suit, am I going to be the only one here? And I said, yeah, unless Dad's there. But for him, it was, so you're saying I can wear jeans? And I was like, yeah, man, you can wear jeans. But the church we grew up in, you don't wear jeans on Sunday. So it's the kind of consideration that you have, food, drink, attire, how flexible, how malleable would those things be in your church today? Take a look at those things right now.
Lots of people pumping in some. Hard page. Hard.
And like the very first row.
I mean, the odds between Jesus
Not even good.
The more there's, you're going to have the sweets. How about a tire? So David,
I think it's pretty valuable.
should have never attempted that.
Okay, we're going to move into some of the more meat and potatoes, pieces of worship side of things. Beginning with the Bible translation that you use in your church, or Bible translations that are present at your church. Well, I'm sure we visited the church where one side of the building has the Message, and the middle has the NIRV, and the NRSV is over there, and the preacher may use the English Standard Version, and you head out to the kids ministry, and it's totally different. I would encourage you greatly to consider how unified you are in that. Let people know what type of Bible you're using so that they can bring it. Make sure that the Bibles that you provide are the same ones that you preach from. There's nothing worse than somebody going, I don't know what they're saying. Right? When the example that's up there doesn't even match the one that you've given them to read from. Some folks, and we encounter this more and more today, ESL. English is a hard language to understand. And it's even more confusing when you're saying, read along with me, and they're going, I am, but the words aren't lining up. One of the biggest shifts that I've made in my ministry with children has been the use of the International Reader's Version translation of the Bible, the NIRV. And it's a Bible that's it's not a paraphrase. What it does is use modern speaking language. It doesn't it doesn't say Jesus is the rice of life, if that's where you are, right? It doesn't say that. It would break down a run-on sentence into smaller ones. And what I've seen happen with the NIRV is children read scripture and only stumble on the names of places and people, which to me says a win. That they're able to read it because the sentences look like the sentences that they see in school. And it gets rid of the alliteration that we sometimes have in some translations of the Bible, where they don't actually translate a word, they just Englishize it. That's another word you could use, Englishize it. So consider the type of Bible translation that you're using and how accessible it is. A lot of us can probably, and this is the tricky thing with this kind of a shift, is that the verses that you know and lean into aren't there anymore. So when you're going to mind, like, you know, what's a verse that you memorized as a kid? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Guess what? That's not in most modern translations. Because nobody says shall not want anymore. Because you don't, right? We never do. Even a simple word like grace is sometimes broken up. Because grace is not a word that we talk about in our vernacular. But God's always flowing, never ending, never earned love, that people understand. Grace, some people don't even do it before meals anymore, right? And so it's finding a translation that speaks the language of your church. If you have two different services, consider two different translations. Because you do have a generation that grew up with the King James Bible, and for them, that's what they know, that's what they speak, that is how they speak sometimes. Know your audience and know the translation of the Bible that would best serve your church. How malleable or hard-baked is the Bible translation that you use at your church?
I'm a King James man because the King James has words that really work for me.
Right. So as an example, this is from the NIRV. The Lord is my shepherd. He gives me everything I need. That's the way it reads in the NIRV, as opposed to the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right? One is something that doesn't make sense to kids. The other one is something that even young families, people who are new to church, can go, He gives me everything I need. And the word want is a tricky word too, because we want lots of things we don't need. This takes it right to what we need, which is what God gives us.
I do my study. Yes. It's my study. It's helpful.
I'm going to try and keep moving so that we don't run too long into lunch. I'm going to talk about the teaching style that is present at your church. Some churches have physical limitations in terms of what kind of teaching style they can use, but there's always options. The reality is that study after study shows that lecture style learning is the least effective learning style there is. And yet it is the learning style that we as churches lean into the most. Which is a bit of a funny thing to consider when you think about it. We spend so much time as leaders building up and working on our message. What are we communicating and how are we saying it? And are we getting the words right? And then we say it in a way that people just don't learn from. By. That sentence went wrong in the end, sorry. So, how valuable is the teaching style? Does your church demand a 20-minute sermon? Does your church allow for visuals? For puppets, for role-playing, for drawing, for kids to come up, for adults to come up and create art in worship. Any sort of way that people can teach and learn that you know that's out there, how willing would your church be to try those things out, not just once a year, but regularly? How malleable or hard-baked is the teaching style of your church?
It's what we do, I guess.
Well, I don't feel like it.
Over there. It takes whatever.
We're going to move over into prayer and worship language. When I was in seminary, my Greek professor revealed to me a very interesting phenomenon that I hadn't realized I was quite fluent in. As much as I struggled with Greek, I was very good at speaking church. That I knew church language like nobody else. I knew exactly what a prayer of approach was, even if nobody else did. I knew what sanctification meant. And, you know, so when ministers would throw out words like that, I knew what they meant because I'd gone to church my whole life. My Greek professor called it stained glass language. Language that we only use in buildings with stained glass in them. But are not found in schools, they're not found in workplaces, that's never what people tweet, right? Like, feeling very sanctified and redeemed today. No. Hashtag everyday life. No, right?
I'm going to try that.
Sorry? Hashtag?
I'm challenging you on that.
Yeah. Sure.
We learned new language.
Exactly.
We're using
Yeah.
words like hashtag, Facebook, Twitter. We're able to learn it because in order to get into the community, the computer world,
Yeah.
we need to talk that language.
Mm-hmm.
So if we talk about a chair or a pew,
Yep.
we're talking about something significantly different because of where it is. So I get what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
but there's nothing wrong with teaching people the language of God.
Completely agree.
So
Teaching it,
Exactly.
not just saying it.
At the same time,
Yeah.
have to be aware that we
Yeah.
have some very valuable points in our congregation that the email letters are great. I don't have a computer.
Right.
So we have to be aware of that as well.
Yep. So the prayer and the worship language at your church will change based on who is there. And the way in which you say it will change based on who is there. An example that we had for us of a change that we made was we were doing our first baptism service here, and we were saying the Apostles' Creed together. Statement of faith to affirm what we believe and all that good stuff. And we had a Pentecostal family that was worshiping with us. And afterwards, the dad came up and he said, so what's with the Catholic Church bit? I said, oh, it means global church, like the worldwide church. And he said, well, why don't you just say that? Because you didn't stop and explain it. And I said, that's a good point. Catholic Church doesn't mean global church to people. People hear Catholic, they think Pope, they think priests, and a bunch of creepy things sometimes, right? Like that's the association. For this family that was still testing us out, he wanted to know what Catholic Church meant because that was a question mark for him. What is this? What's the association there? And so we rewrote the Apostles' Creed in a way that went back to the Greek and now uses the kind of language that we would find in the NIRV. And we say we believe in one global church. It's not that Catholic is a bad word. It's that the time when we use it, we never teach it. You don't go into the Apostles' Creed and say, now before we get into this, just a few moments, a few editorial notes, footnotes on the slides or things like that. It's considering when you use the language and how it's used. Is it something that you can replace, or is it something that is a teachable moment? It's an excellent point about the importance of teaching and how we learn those things. So how malleable or hard-baked do you think that the prayer language and worship language is at your church?
We're doing it. My mindset is that
You're right.
I find that
Lord, if I change from trespasses,
I might see things. So we model. Yeah, I think we model that as leaders.
well, I don't.
Yes, yeah. Teaching students how many people really felt engaged during Presbyterians sharing something. We had people reading stories of people affected by the gospel. How many people have gone away from their home for the kids? In other words, if they didn't appreciate that or get into it, they're not too malleable. Right? They want to sort of, through contact, community more
It's great to see the discussion happening and how people are engaging this stuff. Just as a comment towards this discussion, as David reminded me, I want to remind you, this is a reflection of where we've gone with this conversation. This doesn't mean that this has to be where you go in your context. Maybe the language doesn't need to change. Maybe that's not an issue for you. The question isn't, does it have to change? It's, could it change if it needed to? Is it stuck in a way that is preventing the Spirit from moving? Is it stuck in preventing people from accessing your church? That's the question here. It's not about, do you want to copy what we're doing? Simply sharing how we've encountered these things in our context. So looking at the order of service kind of falls into the same kind of format as teaching style or prayer language. Are there assumptions made in your order of service that somebody coming in for the first time might not understand or be able to navigate? My mom grew up Roman Catholic, and she's often remarked that it's scary to her that after being out of that context for 40 years now, she can go back into a mass and still slip right in, no problem. Her brain clicks into recall mode and she knows the prayers, she knows when to stand, kneel. It's amazing how she can settle into that. And it's also a scary thing for people to enter into. We had a family that we had the blessing of working with as they were looking to celebrate their son's baptism. The church where the baptism was being done didn't allow for them to have a reception, and so they had the reception here. And this mom was wrestling with the fact that she didn't understand and didn't feel comfortable. It kind of creeped her out, the way in which the majority of the people went into this flow that was never explained and that she didn't get. So her husband was raised Catholic, so the kids were being baptized Catholic and that kind of stuff. And so she wasn't. And so she came in and she was kind of like, felt kind of culty. But the same thing can happen in our churches too. If it isn't explained, or if the flow isn't demonstrated in a way that's natural, or opportunity isn't given for people to interact with it in a real way, it can really creep people out. Even something as simple as when we finish reading scripture and we say, this is the word of the Lord, and people say, in that voice. Right? And the visitor goes, whoa, what is that all about, right? So it's, do we again, maybe that's the teaching moment, putting those things down in writing so that people can get it, but what's the flow of your worship? Is there room for movement in that? Is there room to change it up? How hard or malleable is the flow of your worship and the things that happen within worship? I'm going to keep moving so that we don't run too much at a time. I would encourage you to maybe get with your stickers during lunchtime. So the social interaction piece. What sort of things happen on Sunday morning that allow for real social interactions? I know that that's something that's on Lorna's heart because she worships here, and she puts a good point that we have these moments, say good morning to each other, but really all we want you to say is good morning, and then go back to paying attention to what's happening at the front. But if somebody were to say to you, how are you doing? Not good. That's great. Oh, right, like, we need to leave, honey, as soon as the service is over. I don't want them to ask me, hey, can you come talk to me about that thing? Because I really just want them to say good morning, right? We get in that mode. It's like when you go to the movie theaters and they you buy your popcorn and your pop and they're like, enjoy your show, and you say, you too. You're like, right? Because we're used to saying, have a good day, you too, and then enjoy your movie, you too. When you see it, right? Like, these are the kind of flows that we get into. But do we allow for real interactions? We have a family that might get embarrassed for me to say this, but they're a pretty introverted couple. But it's been amazing to see God open them up to the point that on our Thanksgiving breakfast, they came and the first thing they asked was, is there anybody you'd like us to sit with today? Are there any visitors here today that we can sit with? And we were just like, you asked. It's so awesome. Like, you know, that's the kind of space that's created, because we've all been to those churches where it's like, you know, if 8 families show up, they're all going to sit at 2 tables. Boom. And then the rest of the tables are empty and they're taken care of. Instead of spreading out and allowing for people to interact, or, you know, it's that whole idea of, you know, if you sit in the same pew, you know it. They've got their little pew cluster that they say good morning to the same people every week, because they're the ones that sit together, right? After worship, you can know exactly where you're going to find that person because they're talking with so-and-so, and if so-and-so isn't here, whoa, where could they be? Maybe they're lost in the church, I don't know, right? How open is your church to real social interactions? Do you create space for that in your worship calendar? Do you create space for social time as a church? It's something we're working through tremendously. Along the same idea of the preaching of the stained glass stuff is preaching assumptions. A lot of us are used to church for people who go to church. But again, as a church, that we are acutely aware that the people that come here have never been to church before. We are facing new generations of people that were not brought up in the church. Or they were, but in a very summary way. And so when we're preaching, it is so important, we're teaching with our kids, that we're not assuming. We find ourselves catching ourselves constantly saying, and this is the first 2 months, David and I will be like, how many times did I say today, as you may know, or as you know, Jesus, da 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 da, and then you kind of realize that there's a group of people that are going, I don't understand, da 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 da, I don't know what that is, right? We spend time in worship each week asking questions to our kids, and one of the things that we're very intentional about is that none of the questions that we ask are Bible questions. They're always open-ended question that any kid from anywhere could answer, and they would not be wrong. And that's a very intentional thing, because we do get a good number of visitors that come here, and the last thing I would want is for them to feel like they couldn't answer a question and were out of place right out of the gate. And so the question isn't, what is one miracle that Jesus did that is your favorite? That limits the scope of who can answer. That limits the scope of engagement, and it immediately says to the kid, well, I'm behind the ball already, and I'm 5, right? But instead, answering a question like, when's a time when you were afraid? Where is your favorite place to hide? What would you want to do if you could buy anyone in the world, any present at all, what would it be? Any kid can answer into those questions. And what's been amazing for us to see too in that openness and that accessibility is that this has happened a couple of times where we'll have a new kid here and they'll answer with the most off the wall, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they'll say hot dog, right? You're like, of course. And we take them up and you see the parents and they're like, oh, my kid answered hot dog. And then we flip the page and it's my daughter and she says fire truck, right? And it's like, well, we're all on the same page. And it is incredible to watch the weight lift off those parents' shoulders as they go, oh, my kid belongs here. My kid's not the only silly one. Because guess what? Every kid has silly moments. And we have kids that will answer every single week, no matter what the question, with Chuck Norris. Every week. Because they are silly, and they love to have silly fun, and they love to enter into that stuff, and it's amazing. And at the beginning, it was the parents they're like, oh, I can't believe she said that. And now, we're to the point where we can integrate Chuck Norris into some of the visuals that we have, just to get that kid to feel special, right? But she's like, guess what? Chuck Norris. And she's like, yeah! How easily can people enter into what's happening? Preaching assumptions. I skipped over kids' curriculum. Michelle touched on this. With regards to the programming versus engagement, I think she's going to expand a little bit more on this kind of stuff in the afternoon, but how root are those things? Is the only decision that you make when selecting a kid's curriculum how easy it is for your staff to use? or how expensive it is, or, well, we always use this, so we have to keep using it because it's what our team knows. It's not even that it's easy, it's just what they know, right? There's lots of things to consider in that. And we just want you to consider how easy would it be to change it if you needed to. Tell you a lot about the culture of your team dynamic. The degree of formality, we mentioned that again, but to this I just want to share with you a realization that we had. As you can probably tell from what I'm describing, it's a bit of a, what you might call informal atmosphere, as opposed to a more traditional service. But I want to challenge you to consider that formality is not the same as disrespectful. That formality and reverence are not the same thing. Just because something is formal does not mean that it is necessarily reverent, because it might be entirely irreverent for all the wrong reasons. We work very hard to make sure that our service is accessible, but that does not mean that it is disrespectful to God, to our traditions, to the holiness that we are here gathered in. And so I want to encourage you to consider, in your church, is the degree of formality malleable, or is it hard-baked? Is the way that things are done, is it done in that way just because it has to be? Because that's what's proper, that's what's right? Or is it because that is good? That is holy, right? One of the things that we really have found an incredible blessing in is having an open communion time. We never pass the cups or the plate, because we found that as that had been built up for our church families and for us in our contexts, is that it was not necessarily a reverent time, but a very formal time. Where it wasn't about a silent contemplation, it was about just maintaining silence. Where it wasn't about respecting what was being passed, it was more about just don't make eye contact with people, right? And so we worked very hard to create an atmosphere that is incredibly reverent, but also very accessible. We have a bread machine baking away during our service, so that when communion time comes, you hear a beep a few minutes earlier, and when David cracks open that loaf of bread, there's this steam that pours out. So when we're talking about the bread of life being accessible, about Jesus saying, whenever you come and share in this meal, I want you to remember that I love you. That what is created is an atmosphere that holds that in the utmost importance, and creates an atmosphere of not, don't look at me, don't enjoy this. Like, the amount in which you enjoy the bread should be a reflection of how much you enjoy what it is that we're talking about. A dry cracker is what you eat when you feel sick. Right? My home, again, twins coming, full of saltines, full of crackers. And what she craves more than anything else is the food that she can't eat right now, which is fresh, good, warm things. But our kids are you should see the rush and the enjoyment on our kids' faces when we have communion. That it is not a sitting quietly, balancing the cup on that was my brothers and I. When we got our little cup, we would balance it on our knees. And the goal was to hit the other guy. In a way that A, Dad didn't notice, because that was when the meat tenderizer came out. Or B, that, you could get a spill, right? There was no reverence in that for us. It was entirely about the formality, and when you're a kid, formality is something that you just feel like you have to go against because you just do. Formality's on the other team. I'm sorry if it's right, but I just have to fight it. That's kind of the way kids think. But creating an atmosphere of reverence that's not tied to a formality that just starves it of meaning. Consider how malleable or hard-baked the degree of formality may be at your church. We use technology in a lot of different ways here, and our goal is that the technology is used to a point that you don't notice it. Technology is not, technology will not save you. It can be a tool that aids you. Never use technology just because. We've been at churches before where, you know, they have a projector, but it's aimed at the wall in a way that the words are bent. You know, they go over a crease in the wall or a piece of the decor, and so that the words are distorted, or they haven't changed the pitch of the projector, and so the words are kind of like the opening of Star Wars, right? They get less visible the higher up it goes, or at the bottom, it's just impossible to read. That's somebody using it for the wrong reasons. That's somebody, well, we're supposed to have a projector, so we'll use a projector, or not knowing how to use it. That's something that won a victory, but it wasn't necessarily, like they managed to get it in there, but it wasn't with a degree of acceptance, right? Like we've heard of these churches too. You can have it, just don't let anybody know we have it, right? You can do that, just don't tell anybody that that's what you do, right? Technology is there to help us. It's there so that people can hear what's happening. It's there so that people can see what's happening, so that you can enable better learning, better engagement, all those kinds of things. How malleable is the use of technology in your church? Volunteer roles. We touched on this briefly in a couple of interactions during Michelle's portion this morning. Can people really enter into any ministry at your church? Or are there some that, let's face it, they've got a snowball's chance in HE double hockey sticks of ever getting a spot volunteering? Because there's an institution in place in that role. One of the churches I served in the past had a greeter that did not greet. It was the weirdest thing in the world. But nobody would ever ask him not to do that. Because that's what Harold does. He would stand there and he would hand out bulletins. And no matter how many times we asked him to say good morning, or to let people know that if they had young kids that there was a program happening someplace else in the building, it became a routine for me. The service would start, and then I would go down and I would collect the new people. Because they had not been told that the kids program was happening. They had not been told where the nursery was. The volunteer role was so set. Now, on the other end of the spectrum are people that never commit to anything. So you've got the immovables, and then that's a great idea. I just don't want to commit to anything right now, which is more of a young church family thing. So if you think the answer is young families, let me tell you, it's an entirely different set of issues. Because you need people to commit. You need to develop a form. You need to develop a dependability. You need to know that when that's their day, they're going to be there. And so it can happen at both ends of the spectrum, that some people, well, I just don't want to commit to anything. And it's like, well, you kind of need to. How malleable or set in stone is the volunteer culture at your church? And lastly, the attendance expectations. A lot of us haven't adjusted to the fact that young families today, regular church attendance is once or twice a month. Maybe once a month if we're being real. That when somebody is testing out a church, it's not going to be 1 week they weren't there and the next they're there every week. For somebody that's really testing out church for the first time, organic growth, as you can sometimes call it, we've noticed that it's about a 9 to 12 month period. And before that can be a 9 to 12 month period of them accepting your first invitation. If you put an offer out there, we do several breakfasts a year at the big times of the year. We have tables set up like this in worship, and we have food, and then we enter right into worship, right out of the meal. We do it on Thanksgiving, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Family Day is a big one, Easter, a big one, all these kinds of things. You can invite people to something like that 12 times before they come once. And then you go, yeah, they came, and then they don't come for 2 more months, and you're like, oh, they must have hated it. And then we reach out to them and say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, how was the breakfast? They're like, oh, we loved it, it was fantastic. We just haven't gotten our act together. Sunday morning is not claimed time for them yet. So 2 months later, they show up again, and you're like, yeah, they're here, it's a regular Sunday. And then 2 months go by again, you're like, oh, they must must have hated it because there wasn't breakfast. and then we called them back. Hey, how's it going? Good. Yo, we loved it. It was awesome. Thank you so much. Say thank you to so-and-so. We're just trying to get our act together. It's a long process, but we have to be comfortable with that. And we have to develop that thick skin and that willingness to reach out and ask, how'd you like it? Because there's some people that say, no, you know what? Actually, we were totally offended by the fact that our daughter wasn't safe to eat the food. Right? Fair enough. Or, yeah, you know what? Actually, yeah, hockey season started, and so it's really hard for us to figure that out. Oh, swimming, da-da-da-da-da. But you know, the type of transformation that happens, the kind of commitment that happens is that we're starting to see a change in that commitment level for some families. That we have the families that are saying, you know, actually we used to have swimming on Sunday mornings, but we're starting to figure out if there's another time. Because they're claiming that space back. But it's the understanding that we're not just swapping deck chairs. It's not just, you know, people from your church are now coming to my church or whatever. If we're claiming ground, it's a big sacrifice to give up your sleep in Sunday morning. It's a big sacrifice to give up your role of importance as, well, when I go to hockey, people know who I am. I've got my routine and I go and I sit with the other parents and they know that I know their kid's name and they know that I'm gonna call the coach to task. I'm an important person at that place. And they're giving that up to come to church where they're just one of the group to start. That's a big sacrifice. Sleep, family routine. The other thing that we're learning, and this is partially why we're so family-centric here, is that our area is being increasingly populated by people that actually don't work here, but they work in Toronto. It's just cheaper for them to live here. But what that means is, mom or dad are out the door at 6:37 in the morning, and they're sometimes back after bedtime. And so for us, the attendance expectation needs to come hand in hand with the fact that for them, family time is everything. Because they only see their kids on Saturday and Sunday. And so the idea of going to church where they don't see their kid for a portion of the time is honestly something they don't want to give up. It's hard for them to sacrifice that. So that's something that we've had to learn. Okay, what does that look like for us? How do we partner with those families at that point in their life? And so for us, a big piece was we're only expecting this kind of level of commitment as they grow in the church, as they become, you know, you get that credibility to ask harder questions. You know, you've been coming regularly for a while, and thank you for the way in which you're serving when you're here. And Have you ever thought of increasing in this way? Have you thought of getting involved in a small group? Because that's an incredible level of commitment. It's hard to not come when you're really known. It's easy not to come when you're just a member of the crowd. But it takes an adjustment of the attendance expectation, because that affects all of our metrics. You have to change them. It's not about monthly attendance. Sometimes it's about 4-month attendance. Developing your year into quarters instead of 12 sections, because you have to figure out what's the norm. The norm isn't weekly. If you look at the weekly, it's like this, right? You're going, oh, well, that must have sucked. That week was off. What was going on there? And then you find out, you look behind the scenes and you go, there was a hockey tournament that weekend. Oh, there was a festival in this town at that time, right? And you start to see what the patterns are, but you're understanding that this is the new culture for folks. Of course, the grand expectation is that we are at a level of commitment and we're at a level of love with God and with His family, that we are here weekly. That is, of course, the place that we are building towards. And it requires us, in today's culture, accepting a different arc. It's not going to be the 1 week they weren't there and the next week they're there, hook, line, and sinker. We need to adjust our expectations. How willing is your church to adjust or not adjust that kind of expectation? Because that will affect your staffing, that will affect your budget. All kinds of things are affected by that simple expectation. Again, I just want to reiterate that where we are coming from, the perspective that I've been speaking to is a church that is welcoming in people who've never been to church before. So our context reflects that. A lot of what I've been suggesting in terms of the solutions that we use or the things that we've worked through it's a church for the other. That the group that is here, we're constantly having to say to ourselves, is this something we need to let go of? Is this something that we are comfortable with that might not be comfortable for somebody else? It's a constant process of asking, what does the other need? And that's our context. Maybe that's not your context, and that's okay. It's important that you know it so that your ministry can reflect it. And again, the trial and error process that takes, the prayerful discernment, the learning, the research. There are so many different ways that we can learn about things to make those changes before people arrive, so that they're not the empty store kind of interaction for us. Yes?
Who pays the bills? Like, you have a board group that pays the bills, because
Yeah, it is. Our ministry is a heavily subsidized ministry right now, and we are on a 6-year goal for financial independence, or dependence on the church body anyway. And so we have a portion of our gifts that come through grants from our denomination, from private entities, and a lot of Friends of Heritage Green, as we call them. Last week we held a fundraiser that was specifically to the point of, instead of bake sales, we wanted to connect the ask directly with the mission of the church. And so rather than remove it a few steps and rely on the community to support us, we said if this is a kingdom project, we need the kingdom to support it. And so we're going to tell you exactly about what God is doing and exactly where we're going, and ask you to give toward that. And God was very faithful. That was a wonderful event and a real affirmation of where we're going, and knowing that people left knowing about what God is doing and not just with a plate of butter tarts, which is good, don't get me wrong, but yeah. So there's your homework. You have that to work on over lunch, and certainly again I hope that you take that with you as a consideration of where your church is at, where you're going. It's neat to see how spotted your pages are as you look at the different things within your ministries. And again, remembering it's not about traditional versus the contemporary, or what somebody else is doing versus what you're presently doing. It's about where God is leading you and how open is your church to that kind of change. I want to close with a word of prayer, and then we're going to enter into lunch. And by all means, take your food outside. It's a beautiful day if you'd like to walk around our parking lot. We have grass out here. It's actually a little, that's like a free-range pen, but you don't need to do that. Enjoy the grass, enjoy the sunshine, and be blessed. We'll circle you back in as we meet back up for the afternoon together. So let's just give this time and this food over to the Lord. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this morning. God, it has been awesome to see the life in this room, to hear the ways in which you are challenging your people, to hear the ways in which you speak into our lives. And Lord, I just pray that this is a start of movement. As Michelle said, this is a point in history that people will look back and go, something changed them. And Lord, as we are considering the ministry of our congregations, our places of worship, our church families, Lord, help us to never see them as stuck. I pray that we would not be seeking to pour new wine into old wineskins, or see ourselves as a hard pot that has no way of being remolded, Lord, but that we would be constantly in tune with you, and where you are leading, and who you are bringing to us, and how we are responding to them, how we are responding to you, God, in a way that makes us new wineskins with new wine, able to expand as needed, clay that can be reshaped by you. And God, to that point, we pray that it is only you that causes us to expand. It is only you who reshapes us, but we are never reshaped by lies, by the pursuit of perfection, by the pursuit of popularity. Lord, that we are only shaped and molded by you. Thank you for your commitment to us, and thank you for what you are doing today. We pray that you bless this food to our bodies, Lord. We thank you for those who prepared it. Pray that it nourishes us in both body and soul, and may our conversation, as we enjoy it, Lord, be honoring and glorifying to you. And we pray all these things in your mighty name, Jesus. Amen.